In order to do all of this effectively, we must remember the three different ways in which we can acquire knowledge: through theoretical knowledge, practical knowledge, and experimental knowledge. The relationship between these three types of knowledge creates complexity and sometimes even contradictions. And this is prevalent in the area of team performance because its complexity means that sometimes one perspective on something offers a completely different version of the truth than another. So being familiar with the fact that we are going to cover theoretical ideas of team performance, research that's based on experiments, and indeed experience from real life is vital to having a nuanced perspective on the complexities of team performance. The inspiration for the learning that we'll do in this class comes from a whole manner of different backgrounds. As you've seen from the case studies we'll cover, none of those case studies is a case study on a business, but those lessons from those different high-performance teams are valuable to us in applying our learning to management. We'll also look at the high-performance and leading examples from aviation, and worryingly, how very skilled people in the medical world are in fact examples of poor team performance. If you take aviation, to fly is the safest form of travel, and a lot of that is down to the hard work and commitment that has been made by the industry to ensure that these highly functional teams perform to their best at all times. But particularly when things go wrong, they actively try to learn from those things going wrong. There's a culture within the aviation industry whereby if a pilot makes a mistake or something goes wrong, they are empowered to let the community know through a reporting system. And there's no blame. Now, blame is something that we'll touch upon probably every week in this course. But blame is the enemy of team performance, because what blame does is it delegates responsibility of trying to look at what caused the problem, and it locates all the fault within an individual. So what we essentially manage to do is insulate our system, our sense of success within our team. We manage to insulate that by containing fault within one individual. That often never treats the root cause of problems, and that's the reason why the medical industry is far behind, because pilots have managed to disentangle their egos from their operating ability, and when they make a mistake they log it in the system. Unfortunately, the prevailing culture in the medical world is that doctors' egos are very much wrapped up in their performance. Therefore, when they make a mistake, they are not so forthcoming in admitting the mistake and don't view the sharing of that mistake as being something that's valuable to the community. I should say that this culture is going through a rapid process of change in the medical world, but particularly in surgery, that's where we've seen some of the most shocking examples of poor team performance, and people have lost their lives as a result. When people have lost their lives as a result of poor team performance in aviation, usually the result is a proactive response to try and solve that systemic problem. And I can give you countless examples, and probably will throughout the class, of how the aviation style of thinking is a good blueprint for the sort of culture a team should try to adopt. We call that culture black box thinking. That's based on the fact that any aircraft nowadays has a thing called a black box, which is a means of recording all data for the flight, and that's all the data from the systems and controls that operate the aircraft to qualitative data, if you like, of voice recordings of the conversations between the members of the cabin, the cockpit crew, and air traffic control, for example. And by gathering that data, the aviation industry has developed a high-level ability to analyze where mistakes happen. If a plane fatally crashes, the black box is bomb-proof, if you like. It will survive just about any crash. And if a crash takes place, the black box is recovered, and investigation teams analyze the data that the black box has gathered, and that is used to understand the cause of any crash, but equally to take any learning forward that may be evident from the scenario that led to the crash. And that black box thinking, that is transparent. It doesn't look to apportion blame. It looks to understand why things happened, and it looks at a systems level. So it's looking at any individual's role within a complex system, such as keeping a plane flying from A to B. They may identify that someone did something wrong, but they wouldn't apportion blame. They would look at understanding that fault within the context of a system, because sometimes someone may have been the guilty party, if you like. It may be them who has caused a fault. They are the cause of it, but what led them to be the cause may in fact be based in the structure of the system within which they operate, the context within which they are carrying out their duties. And that's a very important distinction to make. And when we're in more informal teams in business, that's very often a mistake that we make, which is we try to find the individual whose fault it is, and as I mentioned before, we blame them, and our gaze of the situation stops there. We don't gaze beyond to look at the system and how perhaps the way in which we structure the team, the culture that we have, the decisions that we'd made previously ultimately led that individual to cause the problem. So black box thinking is something we should aspire to. It's something that the medical world is trying to move towards. Another great example of a high performance team that adopts the approach of black box thinking is Formula One pit crews. That's why Formula One pit crews are able to change a tyre in a matter of seconds, even though it's a complex operation. And in fact, surgical teams in medicine are starting to look at the processes that Formula One pit crews put in place to ensure consistent, sustained performance.